This is Taking Stock on Bloomberg. I'm Julie Hyman in for Pim Fox. Well, investors will get their next insight into the health of the housing market tomorrow. That's when the Mortgage Bankers Association releases its weekly mortgage application data, actually I should say monthly, for the month of June. Meanwhile, the Fed puts out anecdotal information about the state of the economy throughout the country, its so-called beige book. Will we see signs of the dreaded double dip for real estate? You just heard Larry White refer to that. We're joined now by Demir Gjokaj. He's an analyst for ITG Investment Research. He's also a former housing policy advisor to the governor of Hawaii. I did practice that, I promise you, Demir. Also with us, housing economist Michael Carliner, who is also a research affiliate for Harvard University, and he used to advise the National Association of Home Builders. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Demir, I do want to start with you. Obviously, the housing data that we've gotten more recently has not been terribly positive.
Yeah.
I mean, what is it going to take to see some sort of a turnaround in the figures?
Well, I think the sad news is that we're a little bit in the doldrums here, in the sense that if you've actually ever been in the doldrums in the sailing boat, you're not going backwards, you're not going forwards, you just lack the wind to really push you anywhere. So really right now we're in a sort of a waiting game. I think some of the recent numbers are a little bit overblown to the downside. You see this kind of volatility in these numbers. I'm not too surprised, although they were negative. Even in our data, we're seeing some weakness, but by and large, we haven't yet built up an expectation for a double dip, the dreaded double dip in housing. I think really what's happening here is the market's realizing that we don't have the housing market we want to have. We have the housing market that we actually have, where demand is puttering along. There's some there, but it's not quite enough to fuel that kind of growth that would help the rest of the economy move forward here.
I mean, Michael, is it just a matter of that we need more hiring so that people have jobs, they feel comfortable enough to make these purchases?
That's certainly a key factor. I mean, in fact, everything else should be very favorable. We have the lowest mortgage rate since the early 1950s. House prices are very affordable now relative to incomes, but nobody feels any urgency to buy, even if they have the ability to do so. I also would second what Demir said about the numbers maybe look a little worse than the situation. I think there's a couple of factors there. One is that we're comparing it to last year when there was this homebuyer tax credit that temporarily pushed up sales and prices. And the other is that the indexes of house prices are largely affected by this large component that's distressed sales. And if you abstract from those two factors, it still doesn't look very good, but it doesn't look quite as bad.
I mean, what happens, though, Demir, when you get all these homes that the banks are holding that come onto the market, the so-called shadow inventory? I mean, are we going to, not to mention some of the homes that have been held up from foreclosure because of various government regulations and recent government actions?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it's not a satisfactory answer, but it's the answer that's true. We don't know, and the best possible outcome will be that the timing and the pace of this dispersion of this excess product into the market is even. What's happened is there has been a lot of product already dumped onto the market, but it happened in a very paced, very sort of controlled manner. If that continues, I don't see the kind of downside risk that many are afraid of. But there's no doubt that it will hold back the overall growth, and we're going to have to absorb that. And demographically speaking, actually, Michael's done incredible work on demographics, so he could tell you better than I. But demographically speaking, you can't remake demographics; they rebuild themselves over time.
Meaning
we burned out the too young and the too poor, brought them into the housing market, and really burned that demographic out. We aren't going to be able to get that back, especially with these new sort of tighter lending controls. We're not going to be able to get that back for some time. The idea that we're just going to punch through this, I think, is a little bit overblown.
And Michael, I'm curious what your take is on that, especially when you talk about the younger folks now who might otherwise have bought houses, are those who are less likely perhaps to have jobs or to have the disposable income to be putting down payments, certainly on a house with the higher requirements now.
Well, I think it's true that they are less likely to buy houses than they would have a few years ago. But what we also have is a pent-up demand for forming households. We have a lot of people that don't have their own households, either as renters or owners, or living with their parents or with other people. And the delays of those household formations means that we're probably going to have an accelerated rate of household formations within the next year or two.
Meaning that we'll have sort of a bounce back. or pent up demand. But what about Demir?
Right, but most of those marginal households will be renters.
rather than coming in and doing buying.
Right.
Demir, that brings me to another question that I've sort of been trying to get at with a lot of economists and I guess sociologists as well. It would be a good question for. I mean, do we see a cultural sea change here where people don't have to own a home anymore like they used to, certainly back in 2007?
I think that argument's a little overblown because it's something jazzier to talk about in the market, to be frank. I think it's a little bit overblown. I find a lot of people in my key demographic succumbing to it because you form a household, you have a child, you want space, you want ownership. That's still very powerful, and I wouldn't discount that. That said, the fundamental argument that owning a home is less appropriate for today's lifestyle than it was, say, 50 years ago is true. We move more within regions. We have to change jobs more. So there's some truth to it. I think it can be a little bit overblown.